Taylor Meyer is charged with killing his wife, Deborah, while their children were asleep in their house, and he's now being held without bond.
February 14th, 2025, Valentine's Day. A day meant for love, roses, and romantic gestures. But in a quiet Jeffersonville home, someone was taking a photograph. Not of flowers or gifts or smiling faces. A photograph so disturbing, so twisted, that when investigators saw it, seasoned detectives had to step away from their desks. The photo was sent with just 2 words: your fault. Hours earlier, this same house had been decorated for the perfect Valentine's celebration. Children's drawings of the Eiffel Tower hung on the walls. A new dress lay carefully chosen. Dinner from an expensive Japanese steakhouse sat on the table. Someone had planned the hardest I've ever tried romantic evening. But by the time police forced their way inside, they found 3 children under the age of 5, unharmed but traumatized. And they found evidence of a crime so brutal that it would make headlines across the nation. Here's what makes this case absolutely chilling. The person who sent that horrifying photograph, they thought they were the victim. They believed they had been wronged, betrayed, driven to the unthinkable by someone else's actions. But what really happened in those final hours of Valentine's Day 2025? How does a romantic celebration turn into a crime scene that left investigators questioning everything they thought they knew about love, obsession, and revenge? This is the story of Deborah Meyer and the red flags that were hiding behind every "I love you." Deborah Meyer had built the kind of life that looked perfect from the outside. At 36, she was a veteran registered nurse and had recently been promoted to nurse manager at Wellstone Regional Hospital in Jeffersonville, Indiana. Her colleagues described her as dedicated, compassionate, and someone who brought genuine care to her work. She wasn't just treating patients, she was making a difference in people's lives during their most vulnerable moments. At home, Deborah was raising 3 beautiful children, all under the age of 5. Being a mother to 3 young kids while managing a demanding healthcare career required incredible strength and organization. Deborah seemed to handle it all with grace, building a stable, loving environment for her family. Then there was Taylor James Meyer, her husband of 4 years. To everyone who knew them, Taylor appeared to be the perfect partner for Deborah. Here was a man who seemed devoted to his wife and children, someone who understood the demands of Deborah's career and supported her ambitions. Friends and family saw a couple who had found their rhythm, a hardworking nurse manager and her loving, supportive husband. Taylor had a way of presenting himself that impressed people. He was charming, attentive when it mattered, and knew exactly how to play the role of the devoted family man. When he wanted to, Taylor could be incredibly romantic, planning elaborate gestures that made Deborah feel special and appreciated. But here's the first red flag that everyone missed. Taylor's romantic gestures weren't consistent expressions of love. They were calculated performances designed to maintain control and manipulate emotions. The problem with men like Taylor is that they understand how to weaponize romance. They know that grand gestures can create powerful emotional responses, making their partners feel guilty for questioning other behaviors. When someone plans an elaborate Valentine's celebration, it becomes almost impossible to criticize them for other issues without seeming ungrateful or unreasonable. The facade was complete. A respected nurse manager married to her devoted husband, raising 3 beautiful children in what appeared to be a loving home. From the outside, the Meyers looked like they had everything figured out. What nobody could see were the subtle ways Taylor was already establishing control. By the time anyone realized what was really happening behind closed doors, it would be far too late. The perfect Valentine's husband was about to reveal exactly what kind of man he really was, and 3 young children would lose their mother forever. By December 2023, the perfect marriage facade was crumbling, and Deborah Meyer had finally reached her breaking point. On December 28th, she sent Taylor an email that revealed the devastating reality of their relationship, an email that would later serve as a chilling preview of the violence to come. I very much do care about you sending and receiving nudes from people that you have been with before and have a connection with, and I also don't want to see you paying for it, Deborah wrote to her husband. Think about what it takes for a wife to put those words in writing. This wasn't about casual flirtation or innocent friendships. Taylor was actively engaged in sexual communications with other women, paying for explicit content, and maintaining intimate connections with people from his past. While Deborah was working as a nurse manager and raising their 3 young children, her husband was living a secret sexual life online. But the infidelity was just one piece of a much larger pattern of neglect and abandonment. Deborah's email revealed the heartbreaking reality of a woman essentially single parenting while married to a man who had checked out of family life entirely. I get that you have hobbies and want some time to yourself, but I also feel like that should be limited to a certain time of day and not just immediately get home, shower, and go play games and ignore your family that has missed you all day, she continued. Here's red flag number 2. Taylor's video game addiction had become so severe that he was prioritizing virtual worlds over his real-world responsibilities as a husband and father. He would come home from work, shower, and immediately disappear into gaming, leaving Deborah to handle dinner, bedtime routines, and all the emotional labor of family life alone. The email revealed something even more disturbing. Taylor wasn't just neglecting his family, he was actively maintaining a relationship with another woman. Deborah wrote about his communications with his girlfriend and how he had met with this woman just before their family Christmas photos. Raising 3 kids is exhausting, but if I have to and am going to do it alone, just let me know that and I'll figure something else out, Deborah wrote in desperation. These words capture the essence of emotional abandonment. Deborah wasn't just asking for help with practical tasks. She was begging her husband to be present, to participate in the family they had created together. She was essentially telling him, either be a partner or let me go find someone who will be. Red flag number 3. When a man can maintain elaborate online relationships with other women, but can't have a meaningful conversation with his wife, he has made his priorities clear. Taylor had time for gaming marathons, time for sexual communications with other women, time for meeting his girlfriend, but no time for the woman raising his children. The most chilling part of Deborah's email was her willingness to walk away if necessary. She wasn't threatening or manipulative. She was simply stating that she deserved better than what she was getting. A woman confident enough to demand respect and partnership, willing to rebuild her life if her husband couldn't change. For a man like Taylor, this kind of strength and independence in a woman represents the ultimate threat. He could handle Deborah being busy with work and kids because that still left him free to do whatever he wanted. But Deborah demanding accountability, setting boundaries, and threatening to leave? That was unacceptable. The foundation of their marriage wasn't just cracking, it was completely shattered. And Taylor Meyer was about to show exactly how dangerous a man becomes when his wife stops accepting unacceptable behavior. January 2025 marked the beginning of the end for Deborah Meyer, though she had no way of knowing it at the time. It started with a single photograph, an image that would transform Taylor's simmering resentment into deadly obsession. The photo was taken at a casino in southern Indiana. It showed Deborah holding hands with a male coworker, a moment that might have been innocent or friendly to most observers. But when Taylor saw that image, something shifted in his mind. The man who had been neglecting his wife while pursuing other women suddenly became consumed with jealousy over her potential infidelity. Here's red flag number 4, hypocritical jealousy. While Taylor was sending nudes to other women, paying for explicit content, and maintaining a relationship with his girlfriend, he became enraged at the possibility that Deborah might be connecting with someone else. This double standard is classic abuser behavior. What's acceptable for them is unforgivable when done by their victim. Taylor's suspicions began eating away at him. He started surveilling Deborah's activities, monitoring her movements, and becoming hyper-vigilant about her interactions with coworkers. The man who had been emotionally absent from his family suddenly had plenty of time and energy to focus on his wife, but only to watch, suspect, and control her. The casino photo became the foundation for an elaborate conspiracy theory in Taylor's mind. He convinced himself that Deborah was having an active affair with this coworker, despite having no evidence beyond a single photograph. This is how dangerous men justify their escalating behavior. They create narratives that make their victims responsible for their own abuse. Then Taylor made a discovery that fed his growing paranoia. Deborah had saved her coworker's contact information in her phone under the name My Best Friend Emily. To Taylor, this wasn't a woman trying to maintain some privacy in a troubled marriage. This was proof of deception and betrayal. Red flag number 5. When someone becomes obsessed with their partner's phone, contacts, and communications, they're not trying to rebuild trust. They're looking for reasons to justify their rage. Taylor's demand to constantly monitor Deborah's digital life showed he saw her not as a partner with a right to privacy, but as property he owned and controlled. As January turned to February, the tension in the Meyer household became unbearable. Taylor later told police that for the last 2 months, he had been staying home with the kids every Saturday night while she goes and hoovers and lies to my face about it. Notice the language. He wasn't concerned about spending quality time with his children or supporting his wife's need for social connection. He was focused entirely on what he believed she was doing without him. Recognizing their marriage was in crisis, someone, likely Deborah, scheduled a marriage counseling session for February 17, 2025. This represented hope, a final attempt to save their relationship through professional intervention. The counseling appointment was just 3 days after Valentine's Day, suggesting Deborah still believed their problems could be solved through communication and commitment. But for Taylor, the counseling session represented something else entirely, a deadline. He had 2 weeks to either regain control of his wife or face the possibility that a therapist might help Deborah see their relationship clearly and give her the strength to leave. The obsession that began with a casino photo was about to reach its horrific conclusion, and Deborah Meyer, who thought she was fighting to save her marriage, was actually counting down the days until her husband would decide that if he couldn't control her, no one could have her. February 14th, 2025, Valentine's Day. Taylor Meyer had been planning this celebration for weeks. What he created was an elaborate Paris-themed evening that would have impressed anyone looking from the outside. Taylor had thought of everything. He bought Deborah a new dress, not just any dress, but one specifically chosen for this special night. He ordered dinner from Kansai, an upscale Japanese steakhouse, ensuring they would have a restaurant-quality meal in the comfort of their own home. But the most touching detail was having their 3 young children draw pictures of the Eiffel Tower to serve as decorations for the evening. The entire theme was bringing Paris to you, a romantic concept that suggested thoughtfulness and creativity. Taylor had written a personal message in a card, and the couple even danced to their wedding song, recreating the intimacy of their early relationship. From every external perspective, this was the gesture of a devoted husband trying to reignite the romance in his marriage. But here's what makes this celebration so sinister. Taylor wasn't expressing love. He was making a transaction. In his mind, this elaborate effort entitled him to a specific response from Deborah. The grand gesture wasn't about making her happy, it was about proving that he was a good husband and she was an ungrateful wife. This is red flag number 6, love bombing as manipulation. Abusive men often use extreme romantic gestures not to express genuine affection, but to create debt. The underlying message is, look how much I've done for you. Now you owe me gratitude, compliance, and forgiveness for everything else. When the evening unfolded, Taylor was watching Deborah's every reaction, measuring her response against his expectations. He needed her to be overwhelmed with appreciation, to forget about the months of neglect and infidelity, to see him as the romantic husband he was performing to be. Instead, Deborah's reaction was subdued. She may have been dealing with the emotional exhaustion of their troubled marriage, the stress of raising 3 young children while working as a nurse manager, or simply the knowledge that one romantic evening couldn't erase months of problems. Her response was probably normal for someone processing complex emotions in a difficult relationship. But Taylor interpreted her measured reaction as rejection and ingratitude. Later, when speaking to police, he would describe his feelings with devastating clarity. The hardest I've ever tried, she just didn't give a f***. This is the dangerous psychology of entitled men. They believe that minimal effort should produce maximum gratitude. Taylor had spent weeks, maybe months, emotionally neglecting his family, pursuing other women, and prioritizing video games over his responsibilities. But one evening of romantic performance was supposed to make Deborah forget all of that and fall at his feet in appreciation. What happened next would prove that Taylor's grand gesture had never been about love at all. It had been a test, and in his mind, Deborah had failed it spectacularly. The romantic husband was about to become something far more terrifying, and 3 sleeping children upstairs had no idea that their world was about to shatter forever. After the elaborate Paris-themed dinner, after the dancing to their wedding song, after Taylor's grand romantic performance, Deborah Meyer did something that would seal her fate. She left the house. It was just 20 minutes. 20 minutes of stepping away from the suffocating atmosphere of forced romance and unmet expectations. Maybe she needed air. Maybe she needed space to process the evening. Maybe she needed a moment to think about their upcoming marriage counseling session in 3 days. For most people, taking a brief drive after dinner would be unremarkable. But for Taylor Meyer, those 20 minutes represented the ultimate betrayal of his carefully orchestrated evening. His rage was immediate and consuming. In Taylor's mind, Deborah had just proven everything he suspected about her. He was convinced she had driven straight to meet her boyfriend, the co-worker whose contact was saved as "my best friend Emily" in her phone. The timing seemed too convenient, too calculated. In his paranoid worldview, she had endured his romantic gesture just long enough to be polite, then rushed off to be with the man she really wanted. "You're going to drive off right when your boyfriend gets off work. That's pretty convenient," Taylor later recalled saying to Deborah when she confronted him about his suspicions. Here's red flag number 7. When someone interprets normal behavior as evidence of betrayal, they've crossed into dangerous territory. Taylor couldn't accept that his wife might need a moment of independence or solitude. In his mind, every action had to revolve around him and his needs. The 20-minute drive had transformed Taylor from disappointed husband to enraged predator. When Deborah returned home, she walked back into a completely different situation than the one she had left. The man who had been playing romantic husband was now consumed with fury and suspicion. Taylor immediately demanded to see Deborah's phone. This wasn't a request, it was a command. When she refused to hand over her phone, the last pretense of civility evaporated. This moment, when Deborah said no to Taylor's demand, was when their marriage counseling session became irrelevant. This was when Taylor's obsession with control overrode any remaining respect for his wife as an independent human being. The refusal to surrender her phone triggered something primal in Taylor. He began trying to access her smartwatch while she was in the bathroom, desperate to find evidence that would justify his rage. When that failed, he escalated to physical force. Here's red flag number 8. When someone believes they have the right to demand access to your private communications, they don't see you as a partner. They see you as property to be monitored and controlled. What followed was a physical confrontation where Taylor choked Deborah, wrestled her to the ground, and sat on her back while he manually went through her cell phone. The romantic husband who had been dancing with her hours earlier was now physically restraining her to violate her privacy. During this assault, Taylor managed to call the contact saved as "my best friend Emily." When the man answered, Taylor's first words were, "It's your fault. You want to ruin my marriage and tear my family apart." But this phone call would prove to be Taylor's biggest mistake. The person on the other end could hear Deborah screaming for help in the background. Recognizing that someone was in immediate danger, they did exactly what any reasonable person would do. They called 911, and Taylor Meyer was about to show exactly how dangerous a man becomes when his wife dares to assert her independence. What happened next in the Meyer home on Valentine's Day 2025 was so brutal that even seasoned investigators would struggle to process the scene. The physical confrontation escalated rapidly after Taylor's phone call to Deborah's alleged boyfriend. With the man on the other end able to hear Deborah screaming for help in the background, Taylor's rage reached a deadly crescendo. He continued choking his wife while she fought desperately to escape his grip. During the struggle, Deborah managed to hit Taylor with a plastic water bottle, a desperate attempt to defend herself against a man who outweighed and overpowered her. But instead of snapping him back to reality, her resistance only fueled Taylor's violence further. Taylor responded by grabbing a wine bottle and beating Deborah over the head with it repeatedly, striking her skull with savage determination. He continued the assault until she lost consciousness, her body going limp from the trauma. But Taylor wasn't finished. Standing over his unconscious wife, he made a decision that revealed the true depths of his evil. Uncertain whether Deborah was dead or just unconscious, he went to the kitchen and retrieved what he later described to police as a big-ass kitchen knife, a long one. What followed was an act of such brutal savagery that it defies comprehension. Taylor stabbed Deborah approximately 40 times, focusing the attack on her chest and upper body. Each thrust of the knife was deliberate, calculated, designed to ensure that the woman who had dared to leave the house for 20 minutes would never have the opportunity to defy him again. The most horrifying detail, their 3 children, all under the age of 5, were sleeping upstairs throughout the entire attack. The sounds of their mother being beaten and stabbed to death were happening just below their bedrooms, while they slept peacefully, unaware that their world was being destroyed forever. When Deborah Meyer finally stopped breathing, Taylor Meyer's first instinct wasn't remorse or panic, it was revenge. Using Deborah's own phone, he took a photograph of her lifeless, bloodied body lying on the floor where he had butchered her. He sent that photograph to the contact saved as "My best friend Emily," the man he believed was Deborah's boyfriend, with a caption that revealed his twisted psychology: "Your fault." Think about the mindset required for that action. Taylor had just murdered his wife in the most brutal way imaginable, and his immediate response was to traumatize someone else with the evidence of his crime. He wanted the man to see exactly what happened when someone interfered with his marriage. But Taylor wasn't done with his digital confession tour. He also sent a message to Deborah's family members, typing out words that would haunt them forever. "I killed Debbie because she is a cheating, lying bitch." No remorse, no acknowledgement of the 3 children who had just lost their mother. No recognition that he had just destroyed multiple families with his actions. Just blame, rage, and a complete inability to accept responsibility for his choices. The romantic husband's mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the monster that had been hiding underneath all along. When police arrived at the Meyer home on Westwood Drive, they initially encountered a locked door and no response to their repeated knocking. The 911 caller who had heard Deborah screaming for help had provided crucial information that transformed this from a routine domestic call into an emergency rescue operation. As officers forced their way into the home, the garage door suddenly opened and Taylor Meyer emerged. What police encountered was not a distraught husband worried about his missing wife, but an aggressive, hostile man who immediately became combative with the officers trying to help. Taylor was non-compliant from the moment he saw police, forcing officers to use control techniques to subdue him. This wasn't the behavior of someone in shock or grief. This was a man who knew exactly what he had done and was angry about being caught. Here's red flag number 9. When someone responds to police welfare checks with aggression and hostility, they're not protecting their privacy. They're trying to control a situation they know is already lost. While officers were dealing with Taylor's resistance, other officers made the horrific discovery inside the home. They found Deborah's brutally beaten and stabbed body and immediately recognized they were dealing with a homicide scene. But their most urgent priority became finding the 3 young children who lived in the house. Thankfully, all 3 children were found safe inside the home. They had slept through their mother's murder, protected by innocence and distance from the horror that had unfolded downstairs. The officers' relief at finding the children unharmed was tempered by the devastating reality that these babies were now orphans. In custody, Taylor Meyer did something that revealed his true character. He confessed. Not because he felt remorse or wanted to help the investigation, but because he wanted to tell his side of the story and justify his actions.
Well, Taylor Meyer has pleaded not guilty in his wife's death, but court documents reveal truly disturbing details in police interviews, with Meyer describing exactly how and why he killed her. A warning, these details are hard to hear.
Children tucked in bed asleep did not hear the screams of their mother, Deborah, as their father was accused of brutally killing her. Taylor Meyer's actions, self-professed, laid out in 8 pages of a probable cause affidavit to Jeffersonville police.
During his detailed confession to investigators, Taylor displayed a shocking lack of remorse for what he had done. Instead of expressing grief over Deborah's death or concern for his children's future, he focused entirely on explaining why his actions were justified. The investigators conducting the interview were struck by Taylor's narcissistic focus on his own grievances. Even while confessing to one of the most brutal domestic violence murders they had ever encountered, Taylor continued to blame Deborah for forcing him to kill her. Taylor Meyer was formally arrested and charged with murder. He was held without bond in Clark County Detention Center, where he would await trial for the brutal Valentine's Day massacre of his wife. As news of the murder spread through their community, colleagues at Wellstone Regional Hospital struggled to process the loss of their dedicated nurse manager. But nothing could compare to the trauma facing the 3 children, who would now grow up knowing that their father had murdered their mother over 20 minutes of independence. The confession was complete, but the damage Taylor Meyer had inflicted would last for generations. Deborah Meyer's story breaks our hearts because it could be anyone's story. She wasn't naive or weak. She was an accomplished nurse manager, a devoted mother, someone who had tried to save her marriage through honest communication and professional counseling. Yet she still died at the hands of a man who claimed to love her. Here's what we missed. Men who are capable of extreme emotional selfishness are also capable of extreme physical violence when their control is threatened. Red flags we should have recognized. A man who maintains sexual relationships with other women while expecting absolute fidelity from his wife doesn't understand partnership. He understands ownership. When someone can ignore their children's bedtime routine to play video games, but has unlimited energy to monitor their partner's phone, they've revealed their priorities. Most dangerously, men who interpret normal independence as betrayal are walking time bombs. Deborah's 20-minute drive wasn't suspicious behavior. It was a woman exercising basic human autonomy. Taylor's interpretation of this as evidence of infidelity showed he believed his wife existed solely for his convenience and control. The warning signs of dangerous rejection sensitivity include explosive anger when not praised sufficiently for basic efforts, paranoid interpretations of normal behavior, demands for constant access to phones and communications, and the belief that romantic gestures create debt that must be repaid with compliance. But perhaps the most important lesson is recognizing men who see love as ownership rather than partnership. These men don't want wives. They want appliances that provide domestic services, emotional validation, and sexual availability without requiring reciprocal respect or consideration. Deborah Meyer tried everything right. She communicated her needs clearly, set reasonable boundaries, scheduled marriage counseling, and continued trying to save their relationship even when Taylor had clearly checked out. She died because she believed that love could overcome selfishness, that effort could change someone who didn't want to change. Her 3 children will grow up without their mother because Taylor Meyer couldn't accept that love requires respect, partnership demands equality, and marriage means sharing control rather than demanding submission. The red flags were there: the emotional neglect, the infidelity, the gaming addiction, the paranoid jealousy, the explosive reaction to basic independence. We just didn't understand that a man who could ignore his wife's emotional needs for years was fully capable of ending her life when she finally demanded better. Listen to Deborah's story. Learn from the signs we missed. And remember that emotional abuse isn't just cruel. It's often the prelude to something far worse.